So I mentioned in my review of the self-study that Chris Littlewood hadn't used any special tests in that study to identify patients with rotator cuff tendinopathy. So I just thought I'd use this paper by Hegedus to kind of illustrate why he didn't use those tests. And this paper's from 2012. So we have a CASP tool. I'm just going to race through the beginning bit of it. Rather than kind of breaking it down and making this video take ages. It does address a clearly focused question, and they do look for the right type of papers and give quite a good breakdown of the PCOS tool that they use and things and how they do that. It does include all the important relevant studies and deliberately excludes studies used on cadavers or studies that use like particular special instruments to do tests. And the reviewers kind of appear to me, well, we can have a little look at how they assess the quality of the studies. So this is an update of a previous study, and one of the reasons they do update it is so they can use this new tool to assess quality, the QuadAS tool. And they come up with like some interesting stuff about how there's a lot of bias introduced in terms of patient flow, so perhaps like an indeterminate amount of time between issuing the index test and, so for example, Hawkins Kennedy and the criterion standard, so some sort of imaging perhaps. So obviously that introduces bias if you're not doing the gold standard and the index test at the same time. Also kind of issues with use of the reference standards, so not blinding, using inappropriate standards, gold standards like diagnostic ultrasound, and problems with people not like adequately describing the index test, so saying, oh, we did Hawkins Kennedy, but not saying exactly what that is, when perhaps they might have interpreted it differently to what we would imagine Hawkins Kennedy to be, so that reduces applicability. And they have a look at like publication bias and stuff as well, so although that kind of comes later. So they do, in quite a lot of depth, assess the quality of the studies. So they've combined results. Obviously this is to do with diagnostic accuracy, so it's perfectly appropriate to combine 2x2 tables. There's heterogeneity in the studies though, and without going too much into it and without kind of pretending I understand it all, they've given us quite a lot of information about the different statistical tests that they've used to control for that heterogeneity, and also to like determine outlier studies that might kind of skew results, and to look for publication bias as well. So I think it's appropriate for them to combine all this stuff into a systematic review. So what are the overall results of the review? How good are all these shoulder tests that we're taught and that we use, or some of us use in clinical practice? Obviously this is going to involve a lot of like sensitivity, specificity stuff. Not going to pretend that isn't like a bit of a head fuck to me, it is. But we'll start off with kind of perhaps the most familiar test of all, which is the notorious Hawkins Kennedy test. So here we can see that the Hawkins Kennedy test has a sensitivity of 0.8. So that just means that it's going to pick up kind of all the people who come in, and they do have an actual subacromial impingement, whatever that is, and that kind of is another issue. The Hawkins Kennedy test is going to pick up a decent amount of them. 0.8 is pretty much the cut-off point for this being useful. So from that point of view, we can perhaps say that Hawkins Kennedy test, using the kind of spin snout rule, is a good rule out test. So if we get a negative test on the Hawkins Kennedy, then probably someone doesn't have a shoulder impingement. But the Hawkins Kennedy test is massively let down in its usefulness by its poor specificity. So that just means that for all those kind of true positives that you're getting, all those people who really have shoulder impingements, you're getting a lot of false positives as well. It's not a very specific test, which is just kind of a long-winded, kind of confusing way to say that if someone comes in and they have a painful shoulder, like whatever the cause of that pain is, then doing this weird, uncomfortable thing to their shoulder is going to hurt it, and going to give you a positive test. So that's the problem with the Hawkins Kennedy test, and Hegedus explains that the NIRS test and painful arc tests kind of suffer from a similar lack of specificity. So he doesn't say that these are particularly useful tests. Slap lesions, again, he kind of focuses on Jurgensen's here, which has like a really great specificity. but it has such a low sensitivity that it becomes not a very useful test for identifying SLAP lesions. We've got some good news with anterior instability. So the surprise test demonstrated good sensitivity. So that's like a good rule out test. That would likely rule out anterior instability. And he says all three tests for anterior instability, that's the apprehension test, the relocation test, and the surprise test, are very or pretty specific, so they can rule in. If you get like a positive test on these tests, then you can be pretty sure that, or you can rule in with some confidence, anterior instability. And all the values are given here, and you can see how for the impingement tests, really none of them are getting very close to that 0.8 marker. You can see how low the sensitivity is for Jurgensen's, so it's not really going to pick many up. And you can see that the values are a bit better for anterior instability. So those are the three main kind of conditions that he looks at, and that's kind of the meat of the results. But there's some interesting stuff here about test combinations as well. So there's a little cluster of tests that gets kind of decent values for supraspinatus tendinopathy. If you combine apprehension and relocation for anterior instability, let's see what you get. Good values, especially for specificity. So it's a really good rule-in test. So you get positive result for doing both of these. You can rule in anterior instability. So it really does look like these special tests are good for identifying anterior instability. You might say that given all the kind of shitty values for the impingement tests, you could combine them. But look, if you do, how many have you got here? 5 impingement tests, you still have values below 80 for sensitivity and specificity. So they're really not very valuable. And then there's some kind of, so the stuff that we've looked at already is where there's been enough results to kind of combine into a meta-analysis. And then this table here, which I'm not going to go through in too much detail, or any detail at all actually, explains some more individual tests that are promising and have some value, but there wasn't enough literature on them to kind of do a meta-analysis. So that's Hegedus telling us a little bit about how useful shoulder tests are, and the kind of conclusion is that special tests, for the shoulder at least, with some exceptions, are not that special.